going to get started, but good morning, everybody. Andrew McCoy, the industry chair of the Evolving the Workforce COI, and appreciate everyone's interest in the topic on the Cyber Career Pathways tool. Had a couple open items for business just with the COI that I want to talk about, and then I'll kick it over to my colleague Austin, who's the program chair, to introduce our speakers. So people are aware, ELC, the biggest event that ACT-IAC puts on every year, is coming up later this month. 100% virtual event, of course, due to COVID, but it's set for October 26th to October 29th. And it's scheduled only for the mornings instead of full day. But there's a handful of workforce-specific topics that should be of interest for people that I wanted to talk about real quick to potentially get interest up. And if anybody wants to, feel free to reach out to me or the ACT-IAC site, and you can get more information and help with registration. But Workforce Reimagined, Vision for Decentralized Remote Asynchronous Workforce, talking about just after the pandemic, the changes that are happening and what's needing. Another topic that we're talking about is emerging technologies, the road forward, with a subcomponent of that would be the impact on emerging technologies, your blockchain, your AI, your machine learning, and what impact that has with the workforce and what upskilling is required as well. Trustworthy AI, which goes a little bit deeper into the artificial intelligence, which also deals with privacy and ethics. Future of workforce, which is talking about challenges, opportunities, and how the federal government can prepare for the future of the workforce. And then last, the future of federal payments, looking at the CARES Act and how that can be improved and built on from an experience piece. Our next meeting, ELC, so that's October 26th through 29th, will be a great event. Feel free, get more information or register if you have interest. And then our next COI event right now is scheduled for November 19th. We're working on finalizing our speakers, but ideally we're going to be talking about the COVID environment and the management and the changes that we've seen within the workforces. And we've got a few different government speakers that are working on getting approval and being able to talk about their experiences, the changes, and how they're looking to move forward with the situation that we're in. But as I said before, thanks so much for everybody's time and interest. It'll be a great topic. We've had, I think this is the third time we've had this group present, and kind of wrapping it all together and showing the progress they've had in the 2 years since we got to know them. So thank you for everybody. And Austin, I'll let you introduce our speakers. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andrew. And a big thank you to our participants and speakers for joining us today. We have a great program for you. My name is Austin Crittenden, and I am the program chair for our organization. Before I introduce today's speakers, I did want to go over just quick housekeeping. Most importantly, we highly encourage your questions, comments, opinion, feedback. Please use the chat box, or alternatively, we will open up the lines at the end of the presentation if you'd like to raise your voice. But as our speakers are going through the presentation, if you have any thoughts, questions, please use the chat box and we can address those at the end of the presentation. So without any delay, it is my privilege to introduce today's speakers. We have three fantastic speakers for you today. The first, Megan Capicel, is the Associate Chief, the Workforce Planning and Talent Management at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We also have Matt Eisner, who is the Program Lead for the Cyberspace Workforce Development at the Department of Defense, and Chris Paris, the Senior Advisor for Cyber Workforce Management at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Now, together, our three speakers chaired an interagency working group that was responsible for building the Cyber Career Pathways tool, which they will present to you today. And during this session, they will tell you the story behind the tool and the cross-agency collaboration that made it possible. And critically, our speakers will present on insights about how you can use this tool within your own workplace for a wide variety of workforce planning needs and career needs in the cyberspace universe. So without further delay, I will hand it off to our speakers. And thank you for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
we hear you, Megan.
Okay, so I regret that DHS, I think, blocks our video. So I'm actually working on an alternate solution right now, but it might be a few minutes until everybody can see me. So thank you, Austin, for that introduction, and Andrew, it's good to see you. And it's great to be back with you all today as an audience. So we have spoken to you guys over the past year through different veins with the ACT-IAC communities several times. And it's a pleasure to be back with you guys today because we're looking forward to sharing the fruits of our labor here and what we've done and what we have exciting that's coming up. So building on those blocks we've already laid as a foundation. So,
and Megan, it might be worth noting that unfortunately Matt Eisner is unable to be with us.
Right.
As he's recently tested positive for COVID. So
yes,
our thoughts and prayers are with him, and I know he's here in spirit with us, but you just got us for this presentation.
Yes, it was unfortunate, but he's doing okay. And we are in talks with him. So unfortunately, he won't be here with us today. So you're just getting Chris and I, but we are grateful to be here today. So you want to move to the next slide, Chris? So for those who were able to join us previously, we had briefed you on a project that we were embarking on before we had started it. And then again at the ACT-IAC conference on the work we had done to date. So essentially, when they passed the Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Assessment Act, it required us to use the NIST framework. It requires us to go out and code all of the federal workforce, cyber and non-cyber, and update all position descriptions with that. And as we were embarking on this, there wasn't really a lot of clarity in how to go about doing this. And then we also realized that people were starting to establish career pathways, but while we were all using that same core source document in the NIST Cybersecurity Workforce Framework, or Special Publication 800-181, we were also going about it and using different methodologies. So in October of 2018, a few of us in our peer network here got together and we started to discuss what we were doing and decided we should centralize all these disparate efforts to come up with a standard approach to doing these career pathways. So using those same source documents in 800-181 as well as 816, which is the competencies, and establishing a consistent methodology that brought everybody together. And so in doing this, we were going to be able to better recruit, retain, and develop our cyber workforce. And as the federal government, not only would this help brand us as an employer of choice, but it would allow us to all take sort of the same approach so that, you know, we were looking at the same people in different work roles at that same career points through that same lens. So that is how we got started in October of 2018. And I think we'll talk to you today a little bit about how this carried forward. So if you want to move to the next slide, Chris.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you know, before the framework came out, at least the latest iteration, which had the work roles, we were all kind of grappling with how do we talk about cyber? How do we, you know, understand and define cyber work and work roles? And the framework was, you know, with the advent of the work roles, it gave us the tools, the language tools to be able to start communicating with one another in the same language. But with the release of the framework, it actually created some new gaps that needed to be filled, which was, you know, the federal government had aligned its positions to these work roles, but it brought up these questions of what does it mean to occupy a position that's aligned to this work role? How do we recruit towards this work role? How do we train? How do we develop? How do we retain? So, you know, the framework is an amazing resource, but a lot of these questions were going kind of unanswered, or at least being answered independently and in silos. And so one of the great benefits of this interagency working group is starting to address a lot of those questions around recruiting and retaining and developing together as a collective. Go ahead, Megan.
And so to that end, your anecdote there, Chris, reminded me of we had a recruitment event once down in Pensacola, Florida. DHS CISA, we have a duty station down there at PNS Naval Station, and we had a lot of people come. We're hiring 15s, 14s. People were driving literally 12 hours away, and these people had great experience. And even here at the base of this pyramid, everything that we've done is rooted in the occupational series. So it's the guide for occupational groups and families, OPM's guide. And a lot of people don't even know about going and checking the 2210 series to even get those basic, competencies and criteria that are part of each occupational series across the federal government. People don't even know about that. But then they really had almost, very little awareness of that NIST framework. And so we would say to people, wow, you have driven 12 hours away. We need you to go back. You have tremendous experience, but you didn't write that down. And I work in the Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer here at CISA. And, you're required for a federal government job. It has to be in black and white on your resume. We say, take this NIST framework and go back and use this same lexicon to write down what it is you're telling us that you do, because people weren't using that same book of knowledge through that NIST framework to be able to communicate what it is that they're doing. So what we were trying to do is build upon that to link everything together. And so that's what this pyramid is designed to illustrate, is that everything that we've done, while it is rooted in the occupational series and the NIST framework in the cyber workforce is occupational series agnostic. So there are multiple occupational series. It's not just the 2210 IT and cyber specialists, but it extends beyond that to 0343s, 0340s, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward here in the conversation today. But everything is rooted in that occupational series. And then we looked at the NIST framework, which breaks those cyber roles across 52 different work roles. And then we established a career pathway for each one of those. And we'll talk to you a little bit today about how we did that, and how we went about doing that and how that's displayed in our tool. But essentially what that produced was those core tasks, those core competencies and KSAs. And I think we'll have a diagram a little bit later, Chris, about how those all linked together. But
We do, yeah.
it's going to show you guys how looking at those core lens of requirements, because there are thousands of tasks out there, thousands of KSAs, and how we went about deducing the core requirements for those federal, and how we're going to be using those to help inform our recruitment, inform our professional development, inform that retention. And so we were working on that sort of bottom middle layer here, but agencies, because of their specific missions, might need to sort of sprinkle on top, or add to those core requirements based on their specific mission sets. But what we're saying is just this is a basic sort of foundation there in the career pathways for the work roles to determine what we're going to accept across the federal government as those core requirements for each of those career pathways. I think, what is our next slide, Chris? So here is a slide that I love because, I get to both wear my DHS and cyber workforce planning hat, as well as my American taxpayer hat here. And so I hope everybody would be pleased to recognize the cost avoidance activities that we achieved through this effort here. And so by bringing together almost all of the CFO Act agencies, so those large agencies, we were able to save not only a lot of money, but a lot of time, and get a better product, because we weren't looking at it through a myopic lens. So CISA could have done this, and we have a lot of the work roles actually over at CISA, whereas a lot of other shops are just CIO shops and CISO shops and stuff, so they don't have nearly as many. And so we could have embarked on this ourselves and done something and had the CISA point of view on what this is, and then Chris and the VA could have done it separately and had a totally different take on it. But we centralized this effort, and in doing that, we were able to develop a product that was more holistic and representative of what the federal wide and wasn't mission specific, whether that was at the department level or even lower than the department level at specific agency levels within those departments. So through this, we were able to bring together, GS-13s through GS-15 subject matter experts, all federal employees that were able to serve and help us, understand each work role through their lens so that we could end up with that those common core across the federal interagency. And so we saved a bunch of money and a bunch of time in doing that. Chris, you want me to turn it over to you to start?
Yeah, I'll take this line. So it's important for us to maybe take a pause and take a step back. And, the term cyber and cybersecurity mean very different things to nearly everybody. So if you ask, 10 different people what cybersecurity means, you're likely to get 10 different answers. And that's what we were kind of finding out early on when we were leading focus groups with these federal practitioners in these work roles. We would lead a 2-day focus group for one, we'll say software development, work role number 621. And we would have folks come to us and say, you've got the wrong person. I'm not part of the cybersecurity workforce. Somehow, my supervisor must have mistakenly sent me. And it really had us scratching our head because, we're looking at the framework and we're looking at this work role of 621 software developer, and we're saying, how do you not do this? And so it took us actually looking at the tasks, sitting down with that practitioner, going through some of the tasks and saying, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do this? And at the end, they say, yeah, I do all this. I guess I am in the framework. And so we had enough, experiences like that where it really required us to go back to the drawing board and say, how do we re-envision or redepict the NIST framework and the communities that are represented under it? And so we came up with this Venn diagram. Cyber for us is an umbrella term. That is the largest bucket, if you will. But within the cyber workforce, you have multiple communities of skill. And you have your traditional work roles that fall under the information technology, IT. You have those that fall under cybersecurity. So for us, cybersecurity is a subset within the larger cyber workforce. And those are roles that are largely, taking internal defensive measures, protecting and defending, roles that you would find in a security operations center or, an office of information security. And then we aligned work roles that were primarily performed by DoD or our intelligence community under those effects and intel communities there. And then we wanted to show that, the cyber workforce is not just folks who are super technical, hands on keyboard, eyes on a screen, but there are program managers, project managers, investment, portfolio managers, there's curriculum developers, policy and strategy planners, that there are a myriad of less technical work roles that have an equal part to play in the cyber workforce at large. And so we depicted that as a cross-functional community that consists of these life cycle, talent, strategic management, and legal and law enforcement concentrations. So for us, this was kind of a game changer because it really helped us explain not only to our practitioners in our working group, but also to leadership that the workforce that is represented and should be aligned to the framework is much larger than what we originally thought and intended. And so in doing that and depicting it this way, it really helped folks to see just the extent and breadth of who's included in the framework. And we took it a step further, and we had to offer definitions for each of these communities. And I'm not going to go through word by word, but you'll see definitions for each of them there. The IT, cybersecurity, cyber-effects, and intel, as I said before, that's really the technical and tactical work roles that you'll find in the framework. And then you have that cross-functional that serves those more strategic, more leadership. It's a more varied group of skills that are required there. But again, this was very helpful to make sure that we cast as wide of a net as possible when attracting the practitioners to these focus groups, to make sure that we had perspectives that at the end would give us a representation of the federal government and how the federal government views the core elements of these work roles. And I mentioned before, we did this alignment. So it wasn't just enough to say, hey, there's these different communities within the cyber workforce and here's definitions. We actually had to do this alignment of, here are the work roles within the framework. So here's the 52, and here's where they fall in terms of those communities. And we were very intentional to not say IT workforce or cybersecurity workforce. And that's because you can have somebody who, performs a position that's going to require the core skills and perform the core tasks of work roles, perhaps within the IT community, as well as the cybersecurity community, as well as the cross-functional. So we really see these as kind of baseline skills that are required, and you can pick and choose from multiple communities to create that position or to build up the functions that you need to perform on a day-to-day basis. So this alignment was incredibly helpful for our practitioners and leadership, again, to get that broader picture of the cyber workforce at large. And something that was missing is really this idea that to perform the cyber effects and intel roles, intel within the cyber community, departments and agencies have to have specific authorities to actually employ those roles. So especially for the the effects, we're not seeing those roles outside of DoD by and large. And so when the NIST framework was released and the Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Assessment Act required the federal government to do this alignment of position to work role, we didn't at the outset, we didn't have this guidance. So, as everyone independently was trying to grapple with, how do I code? What does it mean to be an all-source analyst? Is all-source analyst just a catch-all for a business analyst? We were noticing a lot of incorrect, inaccurate coding, and it wasn't until we stood up this interagency working group that we began to really develop collectively these best practices for how the government can begin to more accurately assess and align its positions to the framework. And so that's where we really started developing and offering some guidance, like if you're performing a cyber effects role or you want to align a cyber effects work role to your position, you need Title 10, Title 32, or Title 50 authority to do it. And so here, we actually broke it out and said, Title 10 is for armed forces, Title 32 is National Guard, Title 50 is war and national defense. And a lot of agencies came back and said, oh, well, we don't have those authorities. We're a Title 5 agency. I said, yeah, by and large, the majority of the federal government is Title 5. And so that really put into perspective the work roles that we should be focusing on and aligning to our positions versus those that are largely performed, by those Title 10, 32, and 50 agencies. So all that is to say, it wasn't until the standing up of this working group that we had those best practices. And now as we've developed them and we've communicated them, we can start moving, more succinctly or more uniformly along the same path of really refining how we define and align our cyber workforce to the NIST framework. Megan, did you want to take this, or you want me to keep going?
Sure. And there was a question actually in the chat about the data analyst, and it kind of provoked a thought that I had, because a lot of people, if you can just go back maybe one slide real quick.
Sure.
I'm sorry, yeah, that slide. And the question I think was data analyst in the Intel community, and seeing this hopefully will help people understand, like, these are work roles. And I think a lot of the challenge, what we see across the federal government, is people using competencies to sort of, you need data analysis in many of these work roles. So there's competencies, but it's not to take the place of the actual work role. So, I hope that this helps to clarify that, because I think sometimes people want to just take sort of competencies that you need and then apply that as if it's the intent of the actual work role, as opposed to this is that work role. And while you might need data analysis as a competency to perform other work roles, and that's what the career pathways, what the long documents that I think we'll share with you a little bit later, you do need elements of those competencies to perform different work roles, but the intent is really just that data analyst as a role.
Yeah, and maybe it's worth noting here, and this just goes, I'm not as familiar with, we don't know how familiar folks are with, or maybe they're not familiar with the NIST framework. These are work roles, and what it means to be a work role is, work roles have associated tasks and discrete knowledge, skill, and ability statements that go along with them. So these are not just, when you see them bulleted like this, it's not just a list of, competencies, as Megan mentioned. It's an actual role that someone would perform, and they have a discrete list of tasks that they would need to perform. So to Megan's point, does someone in the Intel realm who might perform an all source analyst role have a requirement from a competency perspective of data analysis, or if data analysis is a competency? Sure. There is, I'm sure, a requirement from the knowledge, skill, and ability perspective there, but by and large, the data analyst work role is one that we were finding largely within the IT community. But again, you could be in the Intel realm performing one of the Intel roles, also pulling from roles in the other communities. They're not mutually exclusive.
And yeah, I think we could talk a little bit about breadth and depth at one point, but and in our career pathways too, we ask these subject matter experts, what are synonyms for these names? So that will help you too when you're looking at this to, say, all right, well, would you consider yourself, whatever a synonym for data analyst is, to help just help people understand if that is what the intent of that role is, or if data analysis is more of a competency for another role.
Right. So
go ahead.
Well, we mentioned before that we've come to ACT-IAC 2 times before this. We presented at the ELC, and we briefed the EWF COI, I think back in May or July of last year. Since standing up this working group with the endorsement of the Federal CIO Council, the Federal Chief Human Capital Officer Council, and Chief Learning Officer Council, we've conducted, I think if you count all those dots, it comes out to 39 individual focus groups. And so each, as I mentioned before, each focus group is really zeroing in and putting a magnifying glass on a work role within the framework. And so before COVID, they were 2-day focus groups with practitioners from across government, multiple agencies, spending 2 full days with us to really identify the core attributes of the work role. And post-COVID, due to all of us being virtual and having shortened attention spans, it's a one-day focus group, or they were one-day focus groups. So all of this is really just to paint a picture of the sheer number of focus groups we've led with practitioners and the amount of time that we spent. But it also highlights we did this as a collective. So if an agency wanted to go it alone, they would have had to do exactly this, but do it by themselves and only looking through the lens of how the work role is applied for their particular agency. So a lot of benefit was derived by doing it as a collective. And as you can see, we presented at the ACT-IAC ELC, the NICE conference, and you'll see at the end, this is kind of our capstone here. We released a career path tool, which is really why we're here to not only recap what we've done, but also to present and demo this really cool tool. So that'll come in just a few moments. On the horizon, we've briefed the CIO Council again. We are presenting at USDA's Cybersecurity Expo. We're presenting obviously to you all here, and we will show up again at the NICE conference as well as the K through 12 conference. But what I really want to highlight is we're putting together this report that will detail what we've done in the last 12 months, the methodology we used, the outputs, the actual links to the full career pathway documents, and then intended applications and audiences. And so that is expected to drop early November. And then we're anticipating by the end of December having some playbooks, which really talks about how the different audiences can benefit from these cyber career pathways. And then we do anticipate a iteration of that career pathways tool that we're about to demo for you sometime in early January. So just showing constant momentum, constant iterative progress, and a lot of good things to come. Megan, anything else you want to add to that?
Not right now, no.
Okay. So I think we're gonna transition a little bit to actually talk about what we did with our practitioners and what the objective was for those focus group sessions. And this is, in a nutshell, what we sought to accomplish when we had those folks for 2 full days or a full day after COVID. So like I mentioned before, we put a magnifying glass to the work role. We said, this is how the NIST framework describes this work role. How do you describe it? How do you depict it or describe it to your colleagues, your coworkers? Is there a way that we can tweak it? Are there suggestions that we can provide back to the NIST NICE for how this role can be further developed? And then we took a look at, what's the clearest alignment of work role to occupational series? If you're in this particular work role, what are other logical work roles that you would be paired with? What are some related titles? So Megan mentioned synonyms. Even though we have official position titles like IT specialist or IT cybersecurity specialist, we all have unofficial titles. I'm a senior advisor for cyber workforce management. So we captured, if you're performing cyber defense analyst work role, what are some alternate titles, unofficial titles? What are private sector titles? And all of that is to just show the relationship of these titles to the work roles within the framework. And then we looked at the general schedule. So, how does the breakdown fall for, where we see this work role in terms of grade levels according to the GS? And for a lot of these, we actually partnered with OPM to obtain federal-wide aggregate coding data. So Megan mentioned the Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Assessment Act. We talked about how the federal government had to grapple with how do we align positions to work roles and how do we comply with this legislation. Well, that happened a number of years ago. So now we're finally able to reap some of the benefits of that coding, and it was through partnering with OPM that we now can see in aggregate how the federal government aligns its positions to work roles, and then we're able to extrapolate some of the the position data, the occupational series, the general schedule, the top pairings, and so we're leveraging a lot of that data in our career pathways. And then from a progression mobility standpoint, we wanted to know, and this is a really key point here because it serves as the underpinning for a lot of the career pathways tool. What are the preceding work roles that you might have needed to perform prior to the one that you're performing now? What were the logical or natural stepping stones in terms of work roles that got you to where you're at now? And assuming you want to progress in your career and move out of this work role, where could you go from here? And so this really, gives a nod to the career pathway notion of using the work roles to inform inform or chart a course in cyber for your federal career. So that was a very pivotal or very important exercise that we performed with our practitioners. And then of course we talked about, as someone who performs this role, what are the education certifications that would benefit you? And our partnership with DoD as a tri-chair is really coming into focus here because they are expanding their DoD 8140 cyber workforce qualification requirements in the near future. If anyone knows about 8140 or 8570, they're very certification heavy. Is that in order to be in this cyber position, you have to have these certifications. In the future, when they release the next iteration, they're going to say, well, let's open the aperture of how we qualify folks into cyber. Let's also include educational programs. Let's include training. Let's include certifications. And so that's, in partnering with them, we're actually going to leverage a lot of their qualification requirements because it's going to be by work role. And we also want to leverage them because they had a very rigorous and legally defensible process for assessing certifications and making sure that the content that was taught by them aligned to the knowledge, skill, and ability requirements of the individual work role. So instead of just shouting out certifications, anything under the sun that we thought might be helpful, we are using the feedback that we got from our SMEs, passing it along to DoD, who can then do their more rigorous assessment of certifications. And then Megan, do you want to talk about the identification and capturing of the core content a little bit?
Sure, I'm off mute. Yep. Yes. So through a series of exercises, when we did assemble the subject matter experts in these focus groups, we led a series of exercises that helped us to identify the core tasks, KSAs, and competencies. Actually, do you have this? Is the next slide the linkage with them?
Yeah, the next slide is actually going to just showing some examples, and then we do get to the linkage. Yeah.
And so you can, okay. And so, well, okay, so now I know we're going to walk through that stuff. Right, so we led a series of these exercises that helped us to get down to what we're going to call core, and, you know, had discussions about them to make sure that it was, you know, agreed upon. And then we led to, it's actually easier, I think, if we go into the next slide so you can see it. So, as okay. And so, so with each work role, there is a series of tasks, and some have a short amount of tasks, some have a large amount of tasks, and that can be, you know, 100. And so we asked each of these subject matter experts to individually go through and assess and evaluate which ones they thought were core. And so we tallied those up, and we had these focus groups for anywhere from 7 to about 25, and in some cases it went a little bit beyond that. And so a good amount of people, and so we tallied what those up were, and then we determined that those were core, and then we used those tasks specific to that work role, because those tasks can appear in multiple work roles. But looking at through the lens of that specific work role, so in this use case, we were looking at the cyber defense analyst, which ones were core, and then we then asked them to look at the KSAs specific to each of those tasks and determine which KSAs were necessary. And ultimately, because we can already link the competencies and the KSAs together, we were able to understand which competencies. So we did more of a task analysis approach as opposed to a competency analysis approach. In this, you can flip it on its head and get the competencies through that lens. But you don't need, because competencies are the composition you can see here of multiple KSAs. In the first example, we have 5 or 6. In the second example, I think there's 4. You might not need all of those KS or A's, and to understand, you know, for the whole competency to be able to perform that task. And so we looked at it through the task analysis approach, which was more granular to understand which specific knowledge, skill, or ability you need as a piece of that competency pie in order to perform that task.
Yeah, I think it might be worth just very quickly going back to this this pyramid real quick, because when we say that we've established a criteria or a layer on top of the OC series, what Megan just mentioned is exactly this right here. So when our SMEs said, you know, hey, we're seeing 40 tasks for this work role, the foundational, or, you know, the core subset of tasks that we would expect anyone to be able to qualify themselves against if they want to perform this role is really 12 tasks, or, you know, 10 or 15. That right there, what we were doing is building this federal baseline requirement. So if I, you know, let's say Megan and I establish a rotational program, and I'm sending her cyber defense analyst, and she's sending me some, you know, vulnerability assessment analyst, we have a measure with which we can now say, hey, the folks that you send me, we expect them to be, you know, up to snuff. We expect them to be at least able to qualify themselves against the core content of these work roles. And so now we have that core content to say, you know, if you want to be a cyber defense analyst and qualify and get into that role, you don't need to be able to demonstrate that you can perform 40 discrete tasks, because, you know, maybe that's unreasonable. But we do expect you to be able to perform these 10. And so in that way, it's really taking a much more manageable slice of the work role and turning it into some, you know, some requirements that, or expectations that we would expect someone to be able to qualify themselves against. And I'm going to jump back to where we were. And so, Megan, I think maybe this graphic is really what highlights it best. In doing these exercises, we've kind of identified a gap in the framework. On the left-hand side, you know, the triangle is a task, the circles are, the circles are KSAs, and then the stars are competencies. work roles have tasks, they have KSAs, and because NIST NICE has developed competencies that link the KSAs to the competency, we know this linkage already. But what we saw missing was this right here. We had no link between tasks and KSAs. So even though we knew what someone should perform, even though we knew, what the core tasks were, we didn't know what knowledge, skills, and abilities would support those tasks. And so that's something that we sought to rectify during the focus groups with the SMEs. So we held up the task as it was written in the framework, and we said, what knowledge, skills, and abilities that are associated with this work role do you need in order to execute or perform this task? And in that way, we established that task to KSA link, which is a vital link, because not only does it show you what KSAs you would need, but by virtue of the KSAs being linked to the competencies, you can also say, these competencies or competency slices support these core tasks. And here's a quick output of what that exercise looks like. We have the task as it's written right here. We have in the green all of the KSAs that our SMEs said aligned or critically support that core task. And then we took it one step further and we said, the task is written in a very singular way. How can we tweak it a little bit to develop permutations of that task at multiple skills proficiency levels? And so we called those behavioral indicators. So one of the outputs was, here's the task as it's written. Here's how that task could be performed, or how we might expect it to be performed at a foundational and intermediate or advanced skills proficiency level. And so that way, developing permutations of the task. Anything to add on to that, Megan?
I just, going back and looking at the last slide too, I just wanted to point out, I had mentioned earlier in the conversation our source documents. So we all collectively were using 800-181, which is the NIST NICE framework, and 816, which is those competencies. And so just looking at this picture, that's what this, so in the 800-181, the tasks and the KSAs stand alone. And 816 is the competency. So we were able to link the competencies to KSAs already, but that was, I just wanted to kind of point out that source document so that we're all working from the same,
Yeah. We did not invent anything. We worked from established components that were already out there, as Megan mentioned, from the NICE framework, and then the 816 role-based training guidelines, which had those competencies already developed.
And if you want to go back to the next slide, and actually, can we go back 2 slides, because we didn't actually share that one slide, but I think the one before this. But this is what that framework looks like. So when we are about to publish this more broadly, and this is going to be all incorporated into the tool, which Chris will get into, but this is what that opening page looks like here. So you can see when you're looking at the occupational series, I work in the office of the Chief Human Capital Officer, and talking with classification or human capital specialist, I know that if this is looking at the 511 cyber defense analyst role, 86% of the time that is seen in the 2210 occupational series. That's not to say that makes the most sense for your mission, but it is a good starting point to have that conversation. Now, this also, when they published the Federal Cybersecurity Workforce Assessment Act, there really was no instructions on how to code. And that's why us coming together, talking to make sure that we were, speaking the same language, and this effort here is going to help us. And so maybe some of these are, the 855s, it's 1% of the time. Maybe some of this is going to change over time, because there's going to be more clarity and understanding, and we're going to continue to work with OPM as they continue to receive the data on how people are coded and what those OC series. But this is a good starting point, and it's very likely that a 22 or a cyber defense analyst role is going to be in a 2210 occupational series. And then we look second at the work role pairings here. And so because OPM does collect that data, we were in our partnership with them, we were able to understand if it was a primary cyber defense analyst role, there were like pairings that you would see. And so this is just an indicator to, again, for human capital, to be able to see and say, oh, okay, well, that does make sense that it would be paired with this. maybe less so in other work roles. So we did associate with common pairings. We have the functional titles here. And if you go to CISA.gov /cyber jobs, we actually list all of these work roles out, and then we list their associated functional titles so that people can see themselves. So in government, we love government speak, and we call things maybe not traditionally what they're called in the private sector. So if you were in the private sector and you were looking for a federal position or a position at CISA, that you could come in and see where your role would fall based on how it might not be called a cyber defense analyst role, but it might be called a security analyst. And so there's associated, those are the synonymous titles here. And then as Chris mentioned, we list out sort of those on-ramps and off-ramps where somebody would navigate from and where somebody would navigate to. And that's helping to build not just the ladder here, but that lattice, right? So the ladder is going to be what he was just showing with the task analysis and the behavioral indicators. So if you're trying to grow within the cyber defense analyst role from an entry point to an advanced point, you would be moving through that ladder for each of those tasks, right? Specific to this one work role. If I'm going from a novice cyber defense analyst to an expert cyber defense analyst, I'm going to focus on each of those behaviors and how I can continue to develop training or take training or seek out opportunities that are going to help me advance and grow in that ladder of this role. Whereas in the tool we'll be able to, that Chris is going to demo, is going to be able to show you where those common core tasks or competencies or KSAs are and where those gaps are, so that you can easily navigate from one of these into this role or from this role into the next role, and what those likely pairings are.
Yep, so this is just I think a good glimpse of the depth with which we develop these career pathways. There's a lot of substance to them, especially as you can see with the core tasks, the core KSAs, the core competencies, building those linkages, and then having these kind of task analysis outputs. Now, from the outset, though, we knew we'd be building 30 to 50 page documents. And what we did not want to happen is for them to just go onto a shelf and get dusty. We wanted them to be implemented. We wanted them to be used. We wanted them to serve as guidelines and reference material for our classification specialists, our hiring managers, our supervisors. And to that end, we very early on established a strategic partnership with CISA's Cybersecurity Defense Education and Training team to develop an interactive cyber career pathways tool. And so, a large part of why we're coming back is not just saying, hey, we conducted these 39 focus groups, we built these pathways, but we built a tangible product that will intake a lot of the content that is going to be in those or is already in those 30 to 50 page career pathway documents, and we're putting it into a very digestible and interactive medium by which you can actually see the content and play around with it. And so that is the Cyber Career Pathways tool. And I'm going to transition from the PowerPoint to the actual
While
website.
Chris, you're doing that, I'll just say, Bob, I see your question in here. How are individual capabilities against the framework competencies assessed? Is there a role for certification program with competency testing? We'll get to that in just a second. So that's going to be that follow-on piece Chris had briefly mentioned with the DoD work that they're doing, and we'll talk about what we're doing with our next steps. So more to come on that.
Excellent. Yep. So August 5th is when the Cyber Career Pathways tool went live on the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Careers and Studies. And it's out there. You can go and play around with it. And I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of the features that are currently available, and then we'll transition back to the deck to talk about some of the features that we're working in an agile manner to incorporate into the tool in the coming months. So first off, you'll see this should be reminiscent of the slide above where we depict cyber as that umbrella term, and we depict the communities of skill. So this is all at this point should be familiar, but what you can do is well, okay, so you get the Venn diagram and you have the galaxies, as we call them, of work roles down here, and you can click on, you can hover over. As you hover over one of the work roles, so each planet or galaxy or node, if you will, is a work role. The lines there represent the top 5 work roles that are related to the one that you're hovering over based on overlapping knowledge, skill, ability, and task percentages. So you can kind of get a sense of, systems requirements planner related to enterprise architect, systems developer, and then you can actually click on any one of these. So we'll just do systems requirements planner. So you can click on Systems Requirements Planner. You'll be presented with how it's described in the framework, the community it falls into, the category and specialty area as found within the NIST framework, the specific 3-digit OPM cyber code ID, and then those top 5 work roles that share overlapping knowledge, skill, ability, and task statements. And you can go up here to see the actual tasks of the work role. You'll notice here a C or an A. So that represents core or additional. So that is a nod to the criticality analysis that we performed with the SMEs to identify what that subset of tasks would be and which ones are considered core. And then we have that as well for the knowledge and the skills and the abilities. And then over here, we have capability indicators. So this is a resource that was developed by DHS a few years ago, but it speaks to the credentials and the continuous learning, education, experiential learning and training that each of these work roles may require. Now, one of the cool features about the tool is, you're looking at Systems Requirements Planner, but you're saying, well, I currently perform systems requirements planning or this work role. How do I get into maybe systems development, or how do I become a systems developer? So you can actually click on the one that you want to compare, and it will present the two side by side. There we go. So it'll show you the descriptions for each side by side, the communities, all that good stuff. But then here you can actually see, where do the two roles overlap? So there's a 28% total overlap, but I see here that there's an overlap, a 50% overlap in terms of knowledge, 100% overlap in terms of abilities, and a 6% in terms of shared skills. So this is where I can start to say, I can use this to pinpoint the knowledge areas right here. What you're seeing is all of these knowledge statements align, and then you can see whether they're core or additional. But as you go down, you can start to see, okay, systems requirements on the left and systems developers on the right, these are new knowledge statements, knowledge areas that I might need to, go seek training or certifications to obtain. So you can begin to see where the deltas lie in terms of where you're at from a knowledge, skill, ability, and task standpoint to where you want to go. And so the goal here is really to inform what your future prospects look like, or what your future training and development plan looks like, your IDP. And in the next iteration of the tool, we really hope to include training and certifications leveraging our partnership with DoD.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Chris, there's a question in the chat. Can you reshare on how to do the comparison between the two?
Absolutely, yep. All right. So
and you want to click Federal Core at the top?
Yeah, so that's a great point. So if you just want to see and have the orientation of these work roles based on the federal core, so that the core tasks, core KSAs that our SMEs identified, you can go ahead and just select federal core, and that changes the lines and the overlapping percentages. So you select a work role that you want to look at, software developer, and let's say you want to compare that with systems developer. You just go ahead and you select the next work role that you want to hold up against the software developer, and it'll present them side by side, and it'll show you the core overlap, and each of these will populate based on those overlapping KSAT percentages. And then if you want, you can either go to the separate tabs, or you can just go ahead and click to see, okay, so I see here, overlapping core skills, there's only one overlapping core skill. And here's 4 that maybe I need to work on if I want to progress from being a software developer and moving into a systems development role.
And I can just make the plug here, if you don't mind. So one of the benefits of using this, which was an already established website, within the NICS team under our cyber defense and education team is that there's also, as part of this website, a course training catalog. And so eventually where we're going, not only is it going to be using the information from the DoD's third-party analysis of the core tasks against certifications, but also having the different training vendors who can all write in. I mean, it's open that any training vendor can write in about their training, and they can do this evaluation themselves. So if you see right here, if you need this ability in order to move from point A to point B, that this will link directly to a training that can offer this type of training, so that you can say that you have some knowledge or awareness of this, and then be able to demonstrate in an exercise or some other means that you have this ability. And then also on the nodes over here to the side, the idea here, and it's still, this is, so our launch, as Chris mentioned, was our starting point. This was not our ending point. And so this is something we still meet on a bi-weekly basis with the development team, that we're continuing to evolve this and incorporate more and more information and more development into this. So please bookmark it. I put it in the chat. But the idea here when looking at these nodes too is not just, here's the top 5 in terms of overlap, but you see different sizes, and eventually there might be some difference in shading as well. And that is to also represent, how far away you are from that next point. So from between point A and point B, how likely something is here. There's more overlap in this example that Chris is showing here, and you can see that's demonstrated too in the size of the node. Whereas if you move to a smaller node, there's going to be less overlap, but it's still within that realm of a natural next progression point based on those core requirements. And so again, this is going to eventually link to training where you will be able to go and then just click on this, and then that's going to help people even faster build their IDPs or see how to navigate.
Excellent. Yeah, so I think that's probably the extent that I want to go through the demo of the tool. I'd love for everyone to play around with it, and if you have feedback for us, by all means send it to us. But I think I want to maybe reiterate by going back to the deck. As Megan mentioned, oops.
Oh no.
There we go. All right. So as Megan mentioned, this is V1. This just scratches the surface of all of the content that we've built into those larger career pathway documents. So we meet, as Megan said, on a bi-weekly basis with the development team, and we're constantly saying, all right, the tools out there, this is fantastic. How do we get more into it? How do we make it more usable? And so in future releases, we really want to add some of these features of, how do these work roles align to those federal occupational series? How do they align to those related functional and position titles? Let's show those immediate on-ramps and off-ramps and the logical pairings. So again, using that partnership that we have with OPM to display the federal-wide aggregate data, tying it to those training and certifications as Megan went through, leveraging that partnership with DoD to look at the certs that they've evaluated from their third-party assessor. How do we tie those into the tool so that as you identify that delta, it doesn't just say, hey, you've got this gap, go forth and multiply. No, here's your gap. Here's how we can get you shored up and get you trained and closing that gap. So not just an identification of where you fall short, but also helping you scope out what your immediate learning and development plan can look like. Adding those core competencies, and then of course adding those behavioral indicators, those permutations of how the task is written, because those are a key takeaway from the focus groups of based on varying skills proficiency, here's how you can perform the task in different ways. We kind of have alluded to it multiple times, but the tool is really built for multiple audiences. And I'm about to turn it over to Megan because I know we probably have a lot of human capital folks here, so we want to focus a little bit more specifically on the HC side of things. But I'll give a nod to, we see the career pathway documents, which will eventually, all of the content will be made and incorporated into the tool. And so the tool being applicable for employers, for our classifiers, our HR staffing specialists, our hiring managers, as you're writing those PDs and developing those JOAs and trying to attract the right talent, as you're trying to use your very limited training budget in the best way possible by identifying the courses that most align to the requirements, the knowledge, skill, and ability requirements of a work role. And then we'll go in a little bit later about how we want to develop learning objectives that will inform work role specific courses. From a professional, a career professional standpoint, or even an early career standpoint, so both the professionals and students and recent grads, this tool represents an amazing career discovery mechanism. So prior to this, if you wanted to interact with the NIST framework, you had to go to NIST, Special Pub 800-181. You had to open the Excel document that they provide. You had to go through, 100 different tabs to understand the specific requirements of the work roles. And there wasn't this idea of cyber being this collection of communities of skill. So it's an amazing tool right now because it presents the cyber workforce and these work roles and their requirements in a what I think to be very easy and digestible way. And so we're trying to make it more interactive and easy to use so that we can further this common and collective understanding of what it means to be in the cyber workforce and performing one of these skills. And the hope there is, if you're already a cyber professional, you can use this tool to identify what roles might interest you in terms of, the next steps for your career. Or maybe you're not in the cyber workforce, but you want to get into the cyber workforce. So how do you get reskilled? What work role best aligns to your interest, to your, your particular aptitude? And then identifying that and identifying the training and certs that will get you there. So preparing you to qualify. And that also leads into, students and recent grads. We want to further that pipeline of folks coming out of high school, 2-year vocational schools, 4-year degree programs, and we want to show them what opportunities there are in the federal government. So, what better way to show them the types of work that's performed within our large cyber workforce and allow them to identify their areas of interest. And with that, because I know I want to open the floor at the end of this to questions and answers, I'm going to go ahead and turn it to Megan to talk about some of the more specific human capital applications.
Yes, this is a new slide, so this looks nice, Chris. Thank you. So here at the CISA Office of the Chief Human Capital Officer, we use this data, and it's rooted in almost everything that we do. And so one of the things that we do is using those synonyms. We do labor market and compensation analysis. So we buy survey data and job posting data to look at, who is out there in those different markets, how much they're making, to understand about that. And you hear a lot about pay disparity and stuff, so we can have more insight into that. The position descriptions, we're actively working right now with OPM, and they're leading a working group to help inform how we can standardize our approach across the interagency to how we're developing those position descriptions, but those core criteria really lending to the bulk of that approach in the major duties and responsibilities section with the tasks, as well as in factor 1 with the competencies and KSAs. So using those pieces of information to inform those 2 separate areas in our position descriptions. The classification, we created a classification tool. So as they're having those conversations and looking at those skill communities, whether it's a human capital specialist or the classifier opens up, there it is, opens up a conversation with them. And going back to the skill community definitions, if they're doing, I forget the definitions off the top of my head here at the moment, but asking them sort of which sort of skill area, and then basically starting to deduce from there. And then once they get to a work role level, they can see, where is that likely occupational series that they can have that starting point.
And something, sorry, Meg, I'm going to interject real quick. One of the biggest hurdles that we've encountered from the start of trying to do this federal government alignment of positions to work roles is the relationship that must occur between HR and the subject matter experts that are performing these roles. And so as our hiring managers engage with our classifiers and staffing specialists, this tool here and the career pathways and the career pathways tool, it arms them and it equips them with a lot of really key resources to better engage their customers. So for classifiers to engage their hiring managers, and maybe the hiring manager doesn't know that I need to build a position for a cyber defense analyst. And now the classifier can say, using this tool, well, have you actually looked at incident responder and vulnerability assessment analyst 2 as potential work roles that might benefit the position that you're trying to build? So it gives them a lot more to go into the conversation with, and it better educates them about the cyber workforce, the work roles, and the requirements to ideally build a better position description. Sorry, Megan.
No, that's okay. And I mentioned too about the hiring event that we had down in Pensacola, Florida, and how we were pointing people, to the NIST framework. At CISA, we just wrote this all on our website. So I would encourage other departments and agencies to follow, and in the private sector to run something like this too. So we post out there those core requirements for the tasks, competencies, and KSAs so people can write to them. Writing down the specific task is not going to tell me anything. I mean, you need to write what you did about that task, and what we tell people to do is just build off of this. If the task is doing packet analysis, talk about how you've done packet analysis, for whom you've done packet analysis, what tools you've used for packet analysis. And so using that as the starting point from which to build, but that way they're using that same lexicon. So we publicly post all of this on our CISA careers website so that we can point them to that and say, use this, so that it's helping crack this code, right? Well, they're hackers, so this hopefully helps them crack that code. Recruitment and marketing outreach. We just hired here at CISA a market research analyst who's going to be studying the different markets. So we know, like, for example, in Austin, there's a big software development community with the gaming industry and stuff, so that we can start to study those different markets about where we can go and source talent based on the work roles we employ here at CISA on staff. And so we can have better customized, tailored messages to those specific markets, with our advertising, with our marketing, and with our outreach to those specific communities. So having your workforce coded using the proper codes, and making sure that it is in alignment with what those core criteria are is going to help us better understand where to go, and waste less time for recruitment, and maybe hopefully them come to us as opposed to us having to work harder to go out to them. The aptitude assessments and the skills readiness assessments, and I think, Bob, this kind of goes to your question, but using this information, and we're starting to work with different partners, both to develop requirements on how, if those are the core requirements. And I think, do we have another slide to this about the behavior-based questions and stuff, Chris?
We do, yep.
Okay, yeah, so we'll get to that in just a second, but using the information from the core criteria to inform both the aptitude assessments at the point of recruitment, as well as skills readiness assessments for the people that we have here on staff, or that one would have on staff, and to understand, based on those behavioral indicators and the questions that would ultimately align to those behavioral indicators, where they fall. And if they are, supposed to be at an intermediate level, but their skills readiness indicates they're only still working at a beginner or entry level, then what is that training that they would need to include in their IDPs that they would need to have to get them to that level, as well as even progressing them through that level to get them ready for the next level. So I think, and especially in the federal government, we've had a lot of challenges with the pay comparison between private sector and public sector. And so sometimes there has been sort of overgrading of positions to compensate for the pay, whereas the skill might not necessarily always be what we're suggesting in those behavioral indicators. And so it's getting people trained up to be actually performing at that common understanding. And we, intentionally did not say entry is GS7 or GS9 or GS5, whatever. We intentionally did not say that mid is GS12, because those vary and expectations across the country, and by mission set, so and by work role. So even in the work roles, in the career pathways, you will see the grades that they fall around and where they're most likely seen. And some entry points are GS12 for certain work roles. They're more advanced work roles. Some entry points are GS13 or 14. So that entry point might not always indicate that it is a lower level position, but it's understanding what those expectations are for those entry, intermediate, and advanced levels, and assessing their skills at that level and making sure that the training is designed to either bring them up to where they're supposed to be or readiness posture for where they're going and where they need to be next. We do a ton of data analytics about this. Understanding, we use this, and we have a very thorough attrition model that we use so that we can understand and we can start to target different markets based on where we see people are most likely going to attrit. And we have some, information too about where those natural entry points are in our organization and where people progress and where they end up leaving because they want to progress to a different position. There might not be as many of those positions. For workforce planning and manpower analysis, getting down to the task level, those expectations about what those people are doing, the frequency they need to do it, the volume that it's being done, so that we can structure enough manpower so that we're ready to surge, or that we have in our steady state environment, that we can maintain operations if we're trying to grow in different areas or different sectors, so that you can model and how you need to grow using those work roles to inform all of that. So there's a ton of applications for this and from the human capital standpoint. What do you want to say, Chris?
Yes, I was just going to mention, we constantly, as we engage other partners in the interagency and even the private sector, we constantly reiterate that, before the framework, we were very limited with how we could understand the composition of our workforce. We, of course, had the occupational series, and for those familiar with OPM guidelines, we also had parentheticals that we could associate with our position titles, but it only got us so far. So step one for us is really using the 52 different new lenses that the framework provided us and accurately coding our staff. And then once you have that alignment performed, you can really begin to slice and dice and better understand the composition and start, going through this human capital cycle, or this wheel, to arrive at these, intended outcomes. But at the heart of it is that proper alignment of position to work role, and that understanding of work roles and how they can be used and how they can be blended and how you can use multiple work roles to build a position. So at the heart of everything is using the framework. But as Megan kind of demonstrated, there are so many human capital applications once that alignment's done. And it's really an amazing resource for developing very targeted recruitment, development, and retention strategies, because no longer, at VA do we have a IT workforce of 8,000 people. We have a IT workforce, we have a cyber workforce of folks who occupy, 36 different work roles, and now we can begin to see, are folks in one work role more likely to attrit? Are we having trouble recruiting for a particular work role, and how do we begin to develop those targeted strategies to address our workforce at a work role level?
And I'll say too, Chris, it's hard to get these people, we're trying to be more advanced in how we understand who's where in the country and how to go get those people based on who we have on staff. But equally important is the retention aspect of this, right? It's very, attrition is very costly, vacancy is very costly. And the time to hire in the federal government, we know, is not fast, even though we have many of these are 2210 and have the mission critical direct hire authority associated with it. So even still with that, especially because the classification requirements, it is challenging to bring these people on. It's a long process. And especially when these people can go many places and get top dollar and have a lot of other benefits and perks that are things that the federal government can't offer.
Right.
So it's very important to retain these individuals. And what we're starting to do here, because of the level of data that we have, because of this coding and the understanding about these expectations with the core requirements, we can start to, assess the same way they do in the military. They know if you're on a 4-year contract, they know based on where you are in your life, which carrot to dangle to get you to sign for those next 4 years. And they know if they get you another 4 years, that you're more likely to stay to 10, which then if you stay to 10, you're 75% more likely to stay till 20 because you're already, career invested at that point. And so, I mean, those are anecdotal, those aren't actual specific numbers, but the point is that we're starting to study and understand this to that point to know how to best appeal to each one of these different work roles, or how to help them navigate through these different roles so that they stay with the federal government longer, and see themselves in these positions as more of careers, whether that's at that ladder or the lattice.
Excellent. Yep. And I'm very conscious of time and wanting to open it to questions. So I'm going to breeze through and just wrap up here. So we talked about how we found that gap in the NIST framework and how we kind of made the connection between tasks and their KSAs. Well, we also realized that, phase 2 is largely around learning objectives. So it's not enough to just build that alignment of individual tasks to their individual KSAs, but now we can use that alignment to form learning objectives at multiple proficiency levels. And those learning objectives can and should inform the development of courseware that actually teaches the specific requirements of the work roles. And so as we move forward, we want to maintain this momentum that we've garnered with the interagency. Cyber career pathways, that was kind of phase 1, and we thought we might stop there, but seeing all the work that can continue to be done and these offshoots from phase 1, we're going to continue and press forward. And these are some of the objectives that we want to accomplish in phase 2 with this interagency working group. And that's building these community and work role-based learning objectives, looking at how we can develop work role-based interview questions. So again, arming our HR staff and our hiring managers and any SMEs that would be involved in the applicant review process with questions that they can use to ascertain, someone's predicted success in a work role or their qualification for a position. And then developing the criteria and requirements, as Megan had mentioned before, for aptitude and skills-based assessment. So how do we use the work roles? How do we use the tasks and their aligned KSAs to predict success, but also to assess someone's proficiency at performing the work role? So it's these 3 bullets, while few, represent large, very, very vast amounts of work that need to take place. But we do feel that as a working group and an interagency, we're poised to collectively address them. And so we're kind of excited to begin down that road once we do this socialization of the career pathways and the tool. Megan, I think that's all I've got before we open it up. Is there anything that you want to end with?
We are interested if people are out there from the federal interagency working with your chief learning officers or your learning and development communities. So I think the next slide is probably just our contact information, and you can send us. It indeed is. And that's what I look like, everyone. I'm sorry I couldn't be on video. And so if you do have anybody that would like to participate from the federal side, because this is just scoped right now to federal, but the application is there for the private sector, and we are hoping that the private sector does adopt a lot of our work to the extent that it makes sense for them and their mission. But we are interested in partnering with you, so please let us know. And then here is also the link, and I think there was a question in there about where you can find the career pathways. If you are a federal employee and you do have a DHS, I'm sorry, not a DHS, a PIV card, a government PIV or a CAC card, you can get into the OMB Max portal if you register, and then that is the link to our website where we do have the draft information. We are in the process of doing polishing some things up and getting the 508 compliance and things, so we do intend to host those longer documents about the career pathways and what we were sort of showing you in the previews there on the CIO.gov website as well as the NIST website. So you'll be able to go and download all of those. They will be public facing, and we will continue to evolve the tool to incorporate more and more of that information as well as those learning objectives, et cetera, as we continue to evolve things. So with that, I think we should open up for questions, and I'm sorry.
Definitely, yeah. I'm tired of talking. I want to hear other people.
Thank you kindly, Chris and Megan, for the presentation and for your insight. Definitely, I have a number of questions, but I want to open it up to the audience. If anyone has questions, they are welcome to raise their voice on Zoom or to use the chat box. that includes, of course, our EWF team as well, if you guys have questions. And Nancy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think any participant can speak, right? No one's muted by default.
Right, that is true. Participants can unmute themselves if they have questions.
Okay, fantastic. You know, I had a question that connected with, well, actually, before we get to mine, we have a question here from C, if I'm pronouncing that right. C asks, apologies if you have discussed this. How are you anticipating the NIST framework updates? Chris, Megan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we work very closely with the NIST team on a regular basis. And so we are aware that there's going to be updates made, and we've chatted about that. We've known that, you know, just even going into when the project started, as NIST does with all of their special publications, there's revision cycles to this. And so inherent in that process is going to be the need for us to continually evolve the work that we're doing. So this was just a starting point for us, and we understand that there are going to be changes. We're looking forward to seeing the extent to which those changes are going to take place, but we just know that we're going to have to continue to come back to the table and continue to evolve this. So this isn't a one and done. This is the beginning of a level of effort that's going to need to continue. But good question.
Right, and as we are capturing a lot of the practitioner feedback around the work role description, the wording of the tasks, some perhaps missing KSAs, you know, throughout the process of leading those focus groups, we were also feeding that feedback to the team at NIST. So we're anticipating, you know, when that more substantial review cycle occurs for the work roles and the tasks and KSAs, that some of that feedback would also be incorporated. But as Megan mentioned, we kind of work hand in hand with them and provide them feedback to the draft revision that was out there. And a lot of what we presented here around the communities and the work roles, alignment of work roles to communities, you know, we provided that as feedback to their request for comment.
You guys received a nice comment from Miguel saying that Miguel just wanted to note the hard work in developing and communicating the framework, and thanked you guys for the wonderful presentation. I can second that. Really appreciate you guys providing your insights. I did, you know, in the few minutes that we have, I was curious about something that applies generally, the focus groups. You guys, it sounds like, put a lot of time and effort into these focus groups. Do you have best practices or lessons learned through that process that, you know, folks like myself or more generally people can apply for these projects?
I mean, so for us, the real intent of the focus group was to cast as wide of a net as possible, right? To get as many perspectives within reason, because you can't necessarily hold a focus group with 40 people, but to make sure that we cast that wide net, but also to make sure that we had the right people. So verifying before folks, you know, arrived for those 2-day sessions that they were folks who performed the role day in and day out. And then, you know, we constantly reiterated during the actual sessions that we were not the subject matter experts for the role, that it was simply our job as facilitators to pull information out and synthesize it as best we could. And so to that end, I think we did a great job, but you know, it was really relying on the input of folks who do these roles, perform these roles on a daily basis, and making sure that we had the right people in the room. But it was fascinating from my perspective because, you know, folks maybe came into the day unsure of what the expectations were and unsure of whether they actually fell into the cyber workforce. And, you know, we would end sessions with folks continuing to talk because, you know, the more you pull information out, the more folks love to talk about what they do. And the biggest takeaway I had was we have a very passionate federal cyber workforce. I would say probably very qualified too, but Megan, I don't know if you want to add to that, but for me, the focus groups and actually interacting with the SMEs and learning, I mean, I learned an incredible amount just hearing what everyone does it was a very eye-opening experience for me.
I think the only thing I'd add is actually a little bit more about the working group. So when we took a strategic approach to assemble a working group to make sure there was representation from each of these agencies, and continued to communicate with them and show value by actually sharing with them the products and sharing with them that this is not just like the bridge to nowhere, that this is actually resulting in something. And so, we met with everybody monthly. We followed up with our working group participants, making sure that, I see another question coming in, making sure that they saw the products and that they had this available to them to review and to comment on, and so they could see the actual fruit of their labor there. And so I think that part of our ability to achieve this success, which was a feat, it's been tried several times, but I think taking the approach to have the 3 tri-chairs here from 3 of the largest cyber workforces in the federal government represented through our departments was strategic, and just making sure that we were doing that constant communication and that care with our working group members, which we value tremendously. So it's definitely a bottom up. We have no mandate. There was no mandate for anybody to participate. We had a request go out from the federal CIO saying that the Chief Human Capital Officer Council and the Chief Learning Officer Council have all endorsed us. Their seals will appear on all of our products. So their strategic partnership help us get the membership and the representatives there to, again, get people, because there's no mandate for this. So it was really a grassroots effort from the bottom up, and through their help, and that care, that we were able to have achieve our success. Megan,
Yes, I think to that point, Megan, it really was being action oriented and showing the application and constantly checking in with the working group to show them what the benefits and outcomes were of them sending us their practitioners.
And Teresa had a comment too about looking for our the synonyms for the job roles and the job titles. So those do appear right now just in the, are they actually in the tool, Chris? No,
Not yet. Nope. That's one of the intended features that we want to add.
Yeah, so we will, it's an iterative agile approach with this tool through the development cycles. So that will be there, but they are in the career pathways that will be posted. And if you wanted to see them now, if you don't have OMB Max access, you can go to cisa.gov/cyberjobs, and we have listed all of them out by the work roles.
Well, fantastic. We are coming up to the end of our allotted time. I want to give a big thank you to our speakers for the fantastic presentation and providing your insights today. And a big thank you to our participants for joining us. We had a number of folks from Department of Agriculture and OPM and a number of consulting firms join us today, and we really appreciate your attendance. And
Can I just say one thing in closing, Austin?
Please do, go for it.
And I promise to shut up, but we're building this project for you all. So, if you as the information consumers are not finding it intuitive, or if you're seeing gaps, please reach out to us and let us know. So we want to do once, help many, and in order to achieve that end, we need to, hear from you guys. So if you are seeing something that doesn't seem right, or that we could improve on, please let us know. We are genuinely interested.
And we will send out the presentation to those who asked later this afternoon. So thank you for your interest, and just a big thank you to our speakers today. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate the opportunity to come back and show what we've done in the last year.
Excellent. Everyone have a fantastic rest of your Thursday.
Take care.